Another thing she's tired of hearing about? Her coach. Yes, he was temporarily suspended for what the Women's Tennis Association called a breach of the code of conduct. But she insists he never mistreated her, and she swiftly
5 years ago, you were 1 year old. What were you like as a 1-year-old?
I don't know, I think I should have...
She didn't lose. She's just growing. The Alexandra Eala story that has the entire tennis world talking.
Back to the level I was, of course, we all have ups and downs, and
Let me paint you a picture. The clay courts of Rome. The Foro Italico, one of the most storied venues in all of tennis, where champions are made and legends are born. The air is thick with humidity after a morning of rain. The terracotta surface slower and heavier than usual, almost like it's conspiring against anyone who dares to attack. And standing on that court, racket still in hand after the final point, is a 20-year-old girl from the Philippines who just went toe-to-toe with the second-best tennis player on the planet and made her nervous doing it. Alexandra Eala stood motionless as the match ended. Her eyes swept across the court, across the crowd, taking it all in. She had fought until the very last second against Elena Rybakina, the Wimbledon champion, the Australian Open champion, the ice queen of world tennis. And while the scoreboard read 6-4, 6-3 in Rybakina's favor, something in that stadium felt different. Something felt like this wasn't a defeat. Something felt like this was a beginning. And then something happened that nobody in that crowd expected. As the post-match ceremony began winding down, as Eala stood near the net accepting the polite applause of the Roman faithful, two figures quietly made their way down from the stands. No fanfare, no announcement, no media posse trailing behind them. Just two parents, walking toward their daughter, carrying something small in their hands. A box. And when her mother opened that box and spoke those words, a hush fell over the entire stadium, and more than a few people in those stands found themselves blinking back tears, because what was happening in that moment wasn't about tennis anymore. It was about a family watching their daughter become something extraordinary right before their very eyes. But before we get deep into the emotions, before we talk about what Serena Williams had to say that absolutely silenced Eala's critics, before we break down the jaw-dropping rankings battle brewing between Alex Eala and Emma Raducanu, we need to talk about the match itself. Because if you watched it, you know the scoreline doesn't tell the whole story. Not even close. Elena Rybakina is not a comfortable opponent for anyone on this tour. Standing at 6 feet tall with a serve that has been clocked among the hardest in women's tennis history, she is the kind of player that makes even top 10 stars look ordinary on a bad day. She is cold, precise, and utterly relentless. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't panic. She processes, she executes, and she wins. That's just what she does. World number 2 for a reason. So when Alexandra Eala walked onto that court in Rome for the first time ever facing Rybakina, the tennis world expected a lesson. A quick, clinical lesson delivered by the Kazakhstani superstar that would send the young Filipina home with a handshake and a reality check. That is not what happened. What happened instead was 40-plus minutes in the first set alone of chess at 100 miles per hour, with Eala's left-handed game causing Rybakina visible discomfort on the return. Think about that for a second. Elena Rybakina, uncomfortable. Elena Rybakina, who has beaten Iga Swiatek, who has won 2 Grand Slams, who has been the most dominant server in women's tennis for years, found herself shifting her weight and recalibrating because of a 20-year-old from Manila who hits with her left hand. Rybakina admitted it herself after the match. She didn't hide it, didn't try to downplay it. She looked at the reporters and said, straight-faced, that facing a left-hander is a little bit challenging, especially on the return. She acknowledged that the conditions were heavy and slow because of the rain earlier in the day, and that the ball was sitting up differently than she likes. And even through all of that, even through Eala's resilience and tactical intelligence, Rybakina said she had more opportunities to lead even more convincingly, but couldn't always convert them. Read that again. The world number 2 said she had more opportunities than she was able to take against Alexandra Eala. Against a player who, 12 months ago, most casual tennis fans in the Western world had never heard of. And what was Rybakina most pleased about at the end? Getting through in straight sets. Not dominating. Not cruising. Just getting through in straight sets, which she specifically compared favorably to her experience in Madrid, where things apparently didn't go quite as smoothly. That's the lens through which you need to view this result. A world number 2 breathing a quiet sigh of relief after getting past a 20-year-old in straight sets. That is not a demolition. That is a battle. And Eala was right in the middle of it. Rybakina was gracious enough to praise Eala's performance, acknowledging that she played well, but noting how difficult the conditions made it to judge accurately. And that fairness from Rybakina, that genuine recognition of quality from a player at the very summit of the sport, tells you more about where Eala stands right now than any ranking number ever could. Now let's talk about the conditions themselves, because they matter enormously to understanding this story. When it rains in Rome before a match, the clay doesn't just get wet. It gets transformed. The surface absorbs moisture and becomes almost paste-like, slowing the ball down to the point where even the biggest hitters on tour have to rethink their entire approach. Rybakina herself explained it beautifully after the match. She said that on a rainy day with no sun, the ball becomes really heavy and nearly impossible to hit for winners. She described the conditions as the opposite of what you'd expect at Roland Garros on a sunny day, where the courts become faster and more readable. Rome in the rain is its own beast entirely. And yet Rybakina acknowledged that when Rome gets sunshine, the conditions become more similar to what you'd expect in Paris, which is where everything is heading as the clay season builds toward its Grand Slam crescendo. And now Roland Garros is coming. The red clay of Paris, the most demanding physical and tactical challenge in all of tennis, where the greatest players in history have both triumphed and been broken, where Rafael Nadal built his legend, where the slow surface exposes every weakness and rewards every ounce of patience and mental fortitude, where a girl who trained at the Nadal Academy, who grew up learning the game on clay under the shadow of the sport's greatest clay court warrior, will walk out and compete. Eala's ranking puts her in a fascinating position heading into Paris. Every point she collects between now and the Roland Garros draw matters enormously. Every match she wins at tournaments between Rome and Paris moves her closer to ceding territory, closer to a draw placement that could define her entire season. And every time Elena Rybakina's name appears in a withdrawal announcement rather than a results column, the gap between the two young stars narrows a little more. The Roland Garros draw could produce a scenario where Eala, riding momentum and confidence from her Italian Open performance, walks into a bracket that gives her a genuine path deep into the tournament. And if that happens, if she starts making runs in Paris the way she has been making runs everywhere else, the conversation around her will shift from rising star to genuine contender. But even beyond the tactical considerations, there is something poetic about Alexandra Eala taking her game to the clay of Roland Garros at this moment in her career. She has been growing up in public, developing her game in front of a watchful world that alternates between cheering for her and underestimating her. She has lost matches that felt significant and turned them into fuel. She has faced opponents who were supposed to be too big, too experienced, too powerful for her, and made them work. She is 20 years old. She is just getting started. And the direction of travel is unmistakably upward. Back in that stadium in Rome, after the match, after the crowd had begun processing what they'd witnessed, after Rybakina had said her piece to the reporters and moved on to prepare for the next round, Eala stood with her family in that quiet, unscripted moment that cut through all the noise of rankings and statistics and expert analysis and social media arguments. Her parents hadn't planned a grand gesture. They hadn't organized a press conference or arranged for cameras to capture the moment. They just walked down from the stands, the way parents do, and they stood with their daughter, and they showed her something small, something personal, something that meant everything in the context of everything she has been through and everything she is still building toward. And in that moment, the scoreboard didn't matter. Rybakina's ranking didn't matter. The prize money and the rankings points and the trajectory comparisons with Elena Rybakina didn't matter. What mattered was a family that believed in their daughter through the whole journey. The academies and the junior tours and the grinding professional circuit and the losses that test character and the wins that reward it. And who were there on a rainy afternoon in Rome to remind her of something that no coach or analyst can put into words. That she is not losing. She is growing. And there is a difference. And it matters more than anyone shouting at a scoreboard will ever understand. Serena Williams used the word graduation, and it is the perfect word for this moment in Alexandra Eala's career. She is graduating. She is moving from the class where you prove you belong to the class where you decide how far you want to go. She is standing at the door of something genuinely historic, not just for Philippine tennis, not just for Asian tennis, but for the sport as a whole, which is always hungry for the next extraordinary story, the next player who captures imaginations and demands attention and refuses to be categorized as anything other than exceptional. The Italian Open loss to Rybakina will appear in her record. Future opponents will study it. Analysts will reference it. But the players who end up defining eras in this sport are not the ones who avoided defeat. They are the ones who transformed defeat into direction. And everything about the way Alexandra Eala has handled the trajectory of her career suggests she knows exactly what direction she is heading. Roland Garros is next. Paris is waiting. And somewhere on a clay court in Europe, a 20-year-old lioness from the Philippines is sharpening her claws. The numbers will catch up to the reality soon enough. They always do. If this story gave you chills, if you believe in Alexandra Eala's journey, if you think Serena Williams was absolutely right when she called her the future of this sport, then hit that like button right now, because this channel exists for moments exactly like this one. Drop a comment below. Tell us whether you think Eala can make a deep run at Roland Garros. Tell us whether you think she overtakes Rybakina in the rankings before the clay season is over. Tell us what you think when you watch that girl stand still on a tennis court after a war and hold her head up. And if you are not already subscribed to Champions Tennisitics, what are you doing? Hit that subscribe button. Hit the bell so you never miss a story, because we are going to be right here every step of the way as Alexandra Eala writes the next chapter of what is becoming one of the most compelling stories in tennis. She didn't lose in Rome. She graduated. And the best is absolutely yet to come.